You're doing great today. I want to spend a few moments just walking through what I call a primer of Porter's five forces model, and this is in the context of evaluating competition. This model by Michael Porter, 1979, has been used many times to help describe and analyze a competitive space, if you will, and kind of the pressures and or the power dynamics really that are existed or exerted rather on a company. And so there are five different spaces here. There's three of which though that I really want to place a lot of emphasis on as we kind of talk through here. And one would be the pressure or power that direct competitors or rivals form in this model. So that would be in the inner space there. Those would be the competitors you want to focus on. Oftentimes, first and foremost. The second two, though, are of course important as well. One would be the power or the threat of new entrants, so new companies that are or new product offerings that are going to come in and potentially impair your ability to reach the market and have market share. And then third, the threat of substitute products and services, which again consumers may opt for as a option to satisfy a need or want outside of your product category. So you might not be direct competitors, but they will take customers away and out of the actual product category from not only yourself but also your fellow direct competitors or rivals. The other two components we'll talk about in brief. They really are a little bit different when we talk about competition, the power of buyers and suppliers. So that's a little bit of a different conversation. But by and large, when we talk about these first three initial things, you may recall an image like this where we looked at the product market space and defining what that looks like. And when we did so, we looked at those products that again we compete with directly, and in this case it was a soda or beverage kind of example, and those direct competitors would be other colas in this particular case, followed by indirect competitors, and those would be in the space like flavored other flavors or other types of soft drinks, and then substitutes. What we don't have reflected in here would be new entrants, which the Porter's model adds nicely. But that's kind of one of the models that you can relate from other applications would be this one, and you kind of see how some of these models, while they're slightly different, they capture a lot of the same concepts. So I think looking at a problem or a situation from a couple different ways helps you fully better understand kind of the situation that you're in. Another model or another illustration here would be from the textbook, from another textbook example where we have sort of these three things that Porter kind of describes. At the broad base, we have new entrants and substitutes. This would be also kind of generic competition within a product category. So maybe you don't have, maybe you're the soda, cola company, but you're concerned about energy drinks, or fitness waters, or whatever might be non-carbonated, non-colas. Then you get into the next level, the industry competition, and this would be all the competitors who might be in the carbonated beverage space, so the sodas, and these might be close indirect. These would be indirect competitors, maybe not direct competitors. And then you finally have something called the strategic group, which is another term. And that would be those direct competitors who also have cola beverages as an option, which would directly compete with you. So that's your strategic group of competition. Okay, so again, this is like the third way to look at how you define the different types of competitors that you have. But they all sort of tell you that, look, there are some who are concerned about most, and those are the ones that are closest to you, who are most likely to split or share market with you in your defined product market category. So that's a key thing. Defining your product market is absolutely vital to be able to define who your competitors are. And if they're not in your direct product market, then they're indirect competitors. And if they're even further removed, then they may be some type of a substitute type thing. The one thing this does not really illustrate so well when we talk about new entrants, a new entrant could be in any of these categories, right? You could have a new entrant who enters your strategic group. And so this doesn't kind of capture that quite so clearly, but just know in the back of your mind, new entrants do not need to be from generic competition. They can be from any of these three spaces that we kind of focus on. So when we talk about direct rivals, I think it's kind of this idea that the more the rivalry, the stronger the rivalry, the less attractive in industry is going to be. And I'll just kind of pull this up. A big question we'll ask is, within direct rivals, how much lock-in do you offer, or how much structural bonding is there, in the sense that can customers switch from one to the other quickly and easily? How does that work? And to the degree of which you to compete with your direct rivals would suggest how you differentiate yourself and how you define yourself as different from them. And if a customer's choosing between you and one of your direct rivals, your sales pitch, if you will, or what the key differentiators are of your product to theirs, is going to be something vital. Other things to think about, again, if it's a highly fragmented, pure competition space, you may have many, many, many direct rivals. Otherwise, if you're in an oligopoly, you may only have one or two or three, right? So that's kind of a different dynamic that changes how you kind of view, kind of this direct competitive type of space or thing that you're doing. Um, and then finally, we think about, like, direct competitors. If there are only a few, it's going to be an oligopoly, and this kind of borders this idea of barriers to entry, which we'll mention here in just a moment or two. But is it easy for these new entrants to come in and become a rival? Like, how easy is it for a rival to emerge versus not? And again, that's kind of an industry dynamic that we need to talk about a little bit. That comes into play later when we talk about barriers to entry. So when we talk about this threat of new entrants, if it's easy to enter the industry, then it creates less attractiveness for companies to be in that industry. So remember this idea that when we evaluate an industry, we want to look at how easy is it to compete? How easy is it to mark out your definition of your product and create a group of loyal customers? How easy is it to compete against the other firms that are there, and so on? And that's really kind of this idea that we talk about when we talk about barriers to entry. And there are structurally barriers to entry where some industries are very, very high tech focused. And if you don't have the research and development resources or skills, then it's going to be hard to get into it. Some industries are very, they would call them highly capitally intensive industries. Like, for instance, healthcare is a very difficult industry to come in if you don't have lots and lots of financial resources. Equipment for a medical center is incredibly expensive. The know-how and the resources, and the scientists and the doctors and the human capital is incredibly hard to obtain and secure. So those industries are much harder for new entrants to enter. If you're thinking about opening up a new sandwich shop, the barriers of entry are incredibly low. The technology is low. The The whole nature of the product category is very low. It's easy to obtain the equipment. It doesn't come at a particularly high cost. So you see lots of new restaurants pop up all the time. They close all the time too, but it's easy to get into. So that would be a less attractive industry, especially if you are already in the industry, or it's not one that fosters a protective space. You have to always fight for that type of market. Okay, so new entrants then, the threat of new entrants is really a function of the ability for companies to come in, and what barriers prevent companies from coming in and competing in that space. The more the barriers, the more attractive it is to be in. Now, if you're on the flip side of that, if you're outside of that industry and you want to join it, obviously barriers of entry are bad, right? So it's kind of your perspective. If you're in the industry, lots of barriers exist, then you feel much more protected, and you can act like an oligopolist, or maybe even a monopolist in that particular case. Okay, the third area that we want to focus on, again, this kind of takes the Porter's model, and it takes some of the other models we just looked at and looks at these three forms of competition: direct rivals, new entrants, and substitute products. But substitute products happen to be a problem when you don't focus, or you focus too narrowly on the solutions that you're providing the customer. So in other words, if the problem the customer has is transportation, and you're a car maker, then you should be concerned about the public bus system. If the public bus system or train system, transit system becomes a viable option, then people may very well opt not to have a car. I mean, if you're in a city and you run a parking lot in the city and people pay to park, if more people use public transit, you have less people parking their car. Now, you run a parking lot. And so, what other direct competitors? Well, other parking lots are direct competitors, but this whole idea that people may not even use a car might not be what you're thinking. And that would be what we call marketing myopia, when you too narrowly focus on what you do, as opposed to the broader problem that you're solving. And so this is where companies run into problems where, if new options come up, technologically speaking, and they emerge, and they can wipe out an entire product category. If the price, for instance, or the options become more affordable for other product categories, then consumers shift very quickly and buy those types of things. But at the end here, it's kind of how you define your product structure, product market structure. And again, if you're too far down the chart and you're too focused on what would eventually become a niche, then your market size erodes and the market becomes smaller because you're not seeing all these other things. The other example we use in class deals with this idea that, like if you're that cola beverage company, and you don't see yourself as a carbonated beverage company, if you only see yourself as a cola company, or selling cola as a type of thing, then you run into serious problems. There are very few companies that can exist at that level. Dr. Pepper does a remarkably good job, although they've expanded and they've bought other companies, and they were part of the Keurig group and 7-Up group and all of that. So they've differentiated their portfolio, but to protect themselves against that and become a beverage company, as opposed to just simply a carbonated beverage, and just not even just a specialized carbonated beverage. They've had to broaden their view of how they see the marketplace. So again, substitute products become a problem if you're too narrowly focused on your space and you don't see the bigger problem or the bigger issues that come up. Okay, two other things. Okay, so Porter's Five Forces again deal with the three competitive elements. The other two deal with what we call supplier power and buyer power, and this is really a channels and supply chain question or issue or threat, if you will. So real quickly, if I talk about the supplier power and what that means, it basically is this idea that we look at how many firms out there can provide raw materials and the ingredients you need to run your business. And if there are only a few of those, then they will have a concentrated power to exert on you who needs their ingredients or needs their raw materials in order for you to produce whatever you produce. So if you're in an industry, you're producing a product, maybe you're in the automobile industry, and maybe there's only one or two or three producers of steel. Well, you need a lot of steel to build your product. And if there's only one or two or three suppliers, then they have a concentrated power that they can exert over you. In that case, you're the buyer, and that produces problems. Now, a thing that we can do in either direction, whether it's supplier power or buyer power, is we can create exclusive relationships through interfirm dealings, like we B2B business. We can create a relationship with one of the suppliers to be an exclusive supplier for us, and that creates a dynamic where we control, in essence, some of that supply chain. Um, and when we control that, it means our competitors don't. So in other words, there are strategies that you can employ, but it often is a power dynamic based on how much power or how many suppliers are out there, and the degree to which you can form these relationships. Okay, so again, this is not really a competitive thing, except that the strategy that you use will impact how you compete against your direct competitors and others in the industry. And the same thing can kind of be said about this idea um, of buyer power. When we talk about buyer power, we're talking about those firms or companies who are in your channel of distribution moving towards the customer. And in this sense, who is the distributor, for instance? Who are the retailers? What is the process in which your product becomes disseminated into the market, and who controls that process? If there are lots and lots of ways for you to reach the market with your product, then buyer power disintegrates. It's not as big of an issue. However, if there's only a few ways you can get your product to the market, or the market can access your product, then those ways and the companies that control those ways have the power to do so. So, like one example, a lot of folks have said, well, look, I want to get my product out to a mass market, so we should use Walmart as a way to do that. Well, Walmart recognizes that they reach a lot of the market, and so they exert a lot of power in the channel. So in other words, if you want your product in a Walmart, you have to do and you have to perform in the ways that Walmart wants you to. They're going to exert that power and say, well, look, if you don't do what we want you to do, or we don't do what we need you to do, then you're not going to be in our store. And you lose out on the exposure your product would have to that mass market because of the power they exert. Okay, so this is this idea then, Porter's Five Forces, and again in our context, the way we're using it right here, it's a management sort of dynamic or framework, but it explains, or it helps give us some insight to our three forms of competition: those direct competitors, the indirect or substitute type products, and any new companies that are product versions that come into the market as new entrants. And kind of again, it outlines what you can think about those and what the pressures might be. It adds two other elements which can be talked about specifically and in detail when we talk about distribution analysis. and supply chain management and channels management, those types of things. So, it is important to think about those because you can impact your degree of competitiveness if you can control your supply chain and you can control your channels. But that's a different dynamic. It's a really a different look at things. It's worth looking into and thinking about in detail. So, anyways, this was just a quick little talk about porters. A primer on porters is what I call it. That helps you kind of just see another model of competition. And the more models you see, the more comfortable you'll feel with understanding the overall competitive analysis or competitive landscape that you're in. So, all right, have a great day. Hope you're doing well. Reach out if you have any questions. Thanks.